There was an element of chance, as there often is. In 2004, I was training as a solicitor in one of the big London law firms, and I did part of my training in their Paris office. And in this Paris office, they had a big food law group, and they were organizing an obesity risk seminar, because at this time there was quite a lot of threats or legislative threats, as the industry perceived them to be, regulation of food marketing, adoption of regulation on health claims, nutrition claims, etc., etc. And as a result, I thought, this is exactly what I want to do. I had written my PhD in employment law. I had taught European Union law. My first job was in Cambridge. And I had an interest in children's rights, and I had followed courses on a completely voluntary basis for quite some time on children's rights. And I realized that obesity was the area where I could put all my interests together. I was particularly interested in the European Union perspective, which is still of great interest to me. I was interested in children's rights and the impact that food markets, especially if unregulated, could have on children. And I was interested in doing something new and relatively technical. And this area of obesity seemed to be one where you could put all these interests together while still retaining quite a technical skill, legal skills, analyzing technical legislation where health and trade interact. So that's how I started. As soon as I had this eureka moment, I applied for a postdoctoral fellowship at the European University Institute in Florence, and I used the time that I had, 10 months, to re-specialize, and I read extensively on consumer law and food policy and European Union legislation and what the EU could do, and that's how I wrote my first book on EU law and obesity prevention. At this point, I was doing a bit of human rights, but that was certainly not a large part of my activities, and I was really focused on obesity. Even though to understand obesity regulatory frameworks, you also needed to understand tobacco. So, because quite a lot of what we would apply in relation to food, subject to significant differences, the knowledge we had, legislative and regulatory and jurisprudence knowledge, would come from the tobacco field. But then I started to think that it would make sense to expand to NCDs more broadly, and that coincided with a UN high-level meeting on NCD prevention in 2011, and I started to work very closely with one of my colleagues and friends, Alberto Alemano, with whom we edited a book on regulating lifestyles, the EU alcohol, tobacco, and unhealthy diets, and that's how I broadened the field. And in doing so, I started also to do quite a lot of policy work at European Union level, but also with UN, the World Health Organization in particular. I worked both with the headquarters. I spent 6 months in the Diet and Physical Activity Department of WHO in Geneva, and I also spent some time in their regional office in Cairo for the Eastern Mediterranean region, and I started to do quite a lot of work on how the World Health Organization recommendations on food marketing to children could be implemented by states. And all this interest led me to do more human rights, more international trade law rather than EU law. Of course, because of the jurisdictions in which we were operating. And that's how I did this report with three of my three PhD students and colleagues at Liverpool on food marketing and children's rights, which UNICEF has just published. I think this is a really exciting field, so I would urge people to move into it, because there is so much need for legal capacity in this field that there is space for a whole range of lawyers to work in it. But my key message would be that we need to recognize the complexity of the problems we're addressing, non-communicable diseases, and for us, lawyers, legal academics in this field. That means reinventing a bit how we are used to doing things, because very often we're trained in one area of the law, and hopefully we will be good at it. But when you're proposing to address NCDs, there is no such thing as NCD law. So you need to think about all the sub-disciplines of law. So we've seen quite a lot throughout this conference, but we have trade law, investment law at both global level with WTO law. We have European Union law and trade law, European internal market law. You have consumer law that's relevant. You have tort law when you're talking about strategic litigation. You have human rights law, of course, etc., etc. And the list is more or less endless. So we need to have some determination to engage with a range of people who know better these areas of the law in which we are not experts ourselves, to better address the problem in a comprehensive manner. We need to engage with non-law actors, because as we've often discussed, the laws will rest on a solid evidence base, and this evidence will not be generated by lawyers in most cases. So we need to reflect on how these legal frameworks, these legal tests that we use can integrate all the evidence that we know is relevant to NCD prevention, so the evidence regarding the scope of a given problem, regarding the possible tools, regarding the effectiveness of various interventions, etc., etc. And overall, that requires quite a lot of determination to engage with all the sub-disciplines of law and other disciplines than law, but also it requires a lot of modesty, because you will often be outside your comfort zone, and when you don't know, you need to say, I'm not the best expert. You need to ask someone else, or I will work with someone else to provide some answers. And it's a balance which sometimes can be difficult to strike, because you know, if you've been in the field quite a lot about NCDs, that doesn't mean that you can address every relevant legal problems pertaining to NCD prevention. Just because you're competent as a necessary boundary.